And this is always a sign that you know you got a good topic to discuss, because we're at 47% yes and 53% no on whether Vikings fans would sign Kirk Cousins to a contract extension today. Like if Kirk Cousins, his agent, said to the Vikings, yeah, I'll sign a 5-year extension if you guys put it on the table in the bye week, would you say, all right, Kirk, let's sign it up? And the fans seem to be split basically 50-50 on this one, almost 500 votes on Twitter. So where do you want to start with this conversation, Courtney, on whether the Vikings will sign Kirk Cousins to a contract extension and whether he's done enough to prove that he should be the long-term quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, I'll start with the fact that that's exactly what I thought this fan base and people just partaking in the poll, I thought that's where it would be, because we've seen enough so far through however many games it's been since the turnaround in week 5. We're at week 12 now, so that's 7 games in there, to see that when things are right, when the scheme works, when Kirk is in a good situation, he's a really darn good quarterback, arguably one of the best at performing under those circumstances, as we've seen just kind of from the statistical production over those weeks. But you have a 5-game stretch coming up that's going to determine his long-term future. Like, I'm not of the belief right now that you sign him to an extension. I think you have to see whether this is a guy that down the stretch, let's say week 16, 17, those are games that you need to get into the playoffs. Like if they fumble or if they falter in Seattle, if they lose a game between that stretch of Seattle, Detroit, Los Angeles Chargers, and then you have that Monday night game against Green Bay and then a closeout game against Chicago in week 17. I want to see him handle those situations. Personally, when this whole thing was coming into discussion this offseason, thinking, okay, well, what is it going to take now that we are in year 2 to get Kirk Cousins a contract extension so he's not a lame duck quarterback going into year 3? To me, it was a playoff win. It's not just getting to the playoffs.
Yep.
It's getting that one win that he has never been able to get over his time as a starter. And I still honestly believe that, because if you don't make the playoffs, it is an incredible disappointment at this point.
Yes.
But if you get there and you lose, I still think that there's going to be some doubt out there that he is the long-term answer.
So let's start on the no side then.
Okay.
I mean, if you are selecting no, that means that you want to see the rest of it.
Yeah.
And this stretch is not going to be super easy. They will beat the Chargers by 7 points because everyone beats the Chargers by 7 points.
Yeah.
So we already know the results of that game. Detroit played them tough the first time. I wouldn't expect that they just roll over. They played Dallas tough the other day. We're going to see a really, really difficult Seattle team that's one of the best in the NFL. You're going to see Green Bay again. And that week 17, even if Chicago is a disaster, we know that they always have the capability of shutting down Kirk Cousins. So it is not a super easy stretch. There's a long way to go here. I tend to agree with you in the way that the team and ownership would be looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
They know they could make the playoffs. They made the playoffs with Case Keenum. It's whether they could get over the hump and actually win and do something in the playoffs with this quarterback. And his history is that does not happen. That when there are big games that are must win, he has not performed particularly well. And sure, a game against Dallas where he's good in the bright lights. Okay, congratulations. That's a good win for you. But that's not the same as last year, week 17, win and you're in the playoffs. That's not the same as the playoff game he was in Washington against Green Bay, in which they blew a double-digit lead, or the week 17 game against the New York Giants that they needed to win in 2016, and they didn't come out with a win. And these are always the conversations about Cousins, is whether you can trust him in those types of games. Not can he put up huge numbers in the second half when Denver isn't trying to stop Stephon Diggs from catching 40 or 50-yard passes. And when you go back and look at Case Keenum's numbers across the board in 2017, this is like the redux here. I mean, Case Keenum won 12 games. They give him credit for 11, but he also won the game in Chicago. So he goes 12-3. He had a 98.3 quarterback rating, and Pro Football Focus that year graded Case Keenum 7th best in the NFL, 7th best quarterback in the league that year. And the Vikings said, you know what? Not quite good enough, because he couldn't get us over the hump when our defense struggled. Right now, Kirk Cousins is 5th by Pro Football Focus and has numbers that are reflective of an MVP quarterback. He's got 21 touchdowns, 3 picks. He has a quarterback rating of 114, which is way up at the top of the NFL. I mean, but you could sort of make the same argument that you can get there, but can you get any farther? That would determine it. Now, I guess I would ask off of that, is that really super fair to only judge it off of potentially one playoff game? Is that smart?
No, not necessarily, but look at the window that you have. This team does not have a very, very much longer to make a Super Bowl. Not with this current roster, because you're going to be in rebuild mode soon. Your defense, most of it is on the other side of 30 or getting there. You have a lot of contracts coming due with guys that either want to restructure or guys that you're going to have to decide about whether you're going to extend. Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook included in that. But the window to do it is now. They knew when they signed him to a 3-year contract, like there's a reason it was 3 years. And that's not just Kirk trying to get the out to bet on himself beyond that. They could have given him a $120 million deal, made it 4 years, 5 years, and he probably would have signed it. It's a 3-year deal in a 3-year window, because that's about all this team has with its current group to determine, hey, either we do it now or we're going to have to tear the thing down and just start the studs, because it just isn't going to get, you're just not going to have that much longer with your current group. So I look at it as a high stakes situation that they willingly put themselves into. Like, you had the excuse of year one in 2018 thinking, okay, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, a whole lot of new. Maybe it doesn't go right this first year. Okay, well, what can we learn from? Well, we have the learning experience. Now in year two, put up or shut up, essentially. That's, to me, the message that they had here. And if they don't get it by year two, then you're looking at year three thinking, hey, this is probably where we're going to be as a franchise with this quarterback, that it might not be a Super Bowl winning team. But then, like, how do you rewrite the script beyond that? Like, that's, to me, is changing your identity beyond year three if you don't get where you realistically thought you were going to get with Kirk Cousins. But is it doable right now? I mean, the NFC is a weird place. It is a weird conundrum where teams lose to the Chargers like Green Bay did, and then you have these insane situations with Chicago and the Rams and teams that have been way below expectations, and the Vikings, historic type comeback against a 3-win, nothing to lose Denver team. I mean, it's been such a conundrum. So it's not like the AFC where you say, okay, the Ravens and the Patriots are eons ahead of everybody else. We know those are our two teams. I honestly think the field right now, between the 6 that are currently slated in playoff seeds, any of those teams could probably go to a Super Bowl.
And based on the last couple of weeks, the fact that you had to come down from 20 and the fact that Dallas had the ball in your red zone sitting there with a chance to beat you, and Jason Garrett took that chance away, and Kellen Moore by handing off to Ezekiel Elliott twice, that might cause some hesitation for how good they really are. Now, the numbers on offense are just tremendous. I mean, they're one of the best.
Yeah, they're a 9th ranked offense right now.
Right. One of the best and most explosive offenses in the entire NFL. But in the first half against Denver, you couldn't move the football. And against Kansas City, you have one of those classic Kirk looks, and you have to turn to throwing a bunch of screens to sort of get him out of that funk. In Green Bay and in Chicago, there are long stretches where he just doesn't look very good or capable of putting up points. And even though eventually you sort of work your way out of those, except for in Chicago, and give yourself a chance to win at KC and at Green Bay, it's still sort of screamed, this is what it could look like in the playoffs. And on Sunday, if you're just analyzing Cousins, he does a great job in the second half of bringing you back, but he absolutely got you in that position. I mean, you could blame the defense for allowing some points to Brandon Allen, but your quarterback...
They had 6 possessions, and they punted on all of them.
Right, and fumbled on one of them too. And those long stretches have been, there has been a tendency for those to happen just in the Kirk Cousins era in Minnesota, that where you separate kind of how it looked from what the numbers eventually say. And when they've played really bad defenses, they have absolutely lit them up. But guess what? In the playoffs, there won't be any bad defenses. When he was with Washington, same thing. There won't be bad defenses once you get to the playoffs, or week 17 last year. You got to beat a good defense, and he wasn't able to do it. That if your ultimate goal and your belief is you have good enough players, good enough coaches to win a Super Bowl, or at least get to one, if that's ownership standard, and you go into the first round of the playoffs and Cousins looks like he did on Sunday, where it's very shaky in the pocket and he sacked and he fumbled. If that happens and you lose by 2 scores in the playoffs, I don't think anybody's showing up at his door the next day with a contract extension, even if he leads the NFL in quarterback rating. And here's the precedent for this. In Kansas City in 2017, Alex Smith led the NFL in quarterback rating, and they still said, nah, we're going to Patrick Mahomes.
But I mean, like, this is the most basic point that you're making. And I'm not criticizing the point. I'm just saying this is what Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer said at the combine. 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. What the hell does that mean? It means absolutely jack squat until you win a game, until you win a playoff game, until you have a winning record and you make it to the postseason and you have something to show for that. Like, we're going backwards here when we ask this question, because at this point, and I remember I asked Gary Kubiak, or was it Spielman that I asked this today, just about the whole next level narrative?
Yeah. Yep.
Like, how do you know he's at next level? Well, in truth be told, he's playing really well right now. Like, incredible statistics. Like, I'm honestly kind of surprised more people when you bring up the MVP conversation, or that he's having an MVP-like season. His name really hasn't been thrown around yet, and I get it. It's such a heavy field, top 1 through 5, but not even kind of a, hey, what about a dark horse candidate in Kirk Cousins? And I don't know if that's whether people believe that there will be some point of regression, but also we were talking about this guy as a game manager in the first 4 weeks of the season, and whether the Vikings could kind of own up to that and work around it. Like, it's been 12 weeks now, or we're entering the 12th week of this experiment in year 2, where I think people are just still a little gun shy to go all in. And yeah, he has a really good body of work to show since week 5, and it's done really, really well when they're throwing in bootlegs and they're using a lot of play action and they're rolling him to his left and he's making throws on the run. But this next stretch of the season is going to determine whether they can get as far as they want to with Kirk Cousins, and I just don't know if you can make that decision just yet until you see how he handles Seattle coming out of a bye week. I mean, if the offense comes out the way it did against Denver, it will lose, and that game will be lost before halftime. So I think that, bottom line here, the numbers are great right now. They've been really good his entire career. That's why he's everybody's favorite fantasy football quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But what do those translate to if it's not getting you to the postseason? Why'd you sign him? If you want somebody who can put up Alex Smith-like QBR, go find that guy and see if he can get you to the postseason, because just seeing from the way history, looking at that angle, that didn't work out for the Kansas City Chiefs.
And there have been many quarterbacks who fall into this same category, and it's hard to know exactly what to do with any of them. And what I mean is the ones that you are sure can put up great numbers and have great seasons when everything goes right around them. And aside from an Adam Thielen injury, which everyone has one injury, everything has gone right around him. Stephon Diggs is playing incredible football. Gary Kubiak is here, and Kevin Stefanski has emerged as a head coaching potential. Irv Smith has been a huge hit. He's been great at a completely different element to your offense. The offensive line has been average, which is a massive improvement from where it was last year. And of course, Dalvin Cook has drawn the attention of everybody on the opposing defenses. And that's been a huge deal for Kirk Cousins to have the type of success that he's had. And Keenum is the great example of how you can have an average quarterback in terms of talent, or in Keenum's case, probably a below average, who has a great season, and it sort of spikes with his career and you reach the peak of where you're at. But when you get into those playoff games, which Keenum nearly threw away against New Orleans, but needed a miracle to win that one, and then goes to Philly and is completely shut down. Like, the fear is that Cousins, even though more talented, falls into that same Matt Stafford, Derek Carr type of, like, yes, he's good, and yes, he can win you a certain amount of games, but can he really get you any farther, like the guys Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady? And if you're only shooting for that, though, that's really tough.
That's what I mean. It's like you're going to fall more on I take the field, because you're never going to get those top 5 guys. Like, they're already signed on to different franchises. There's a very unlikely chance that they become available in free agency, unlike the Drew Brees situation the other 2 years ago, but we knew he was going back to the Saints. Like, you're never, if those guys are already accounted for and you have the rest of the field, you're probably taking a chance on somebody who is more likely to regress to the mean than to get you over the hump and just become this gigantic surprise because he hasn't done it at any other point of his career. So I think that there is the argument of signing him right now, because you know that, hey, comparatively speaking to the rest of the league, this is good. This is on the verge of being great.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't know if you're ever going to truly have that comfort level where you're going to know that he can be one of those guys that can get you out of any situation. just because those guys are so few and far between. They just don't, they're not, you can't find them that often.
Well, the price tag really matters too.
Well, sure, because
It
they're like
matters a
$4
lot.
million under the cap already for next year, over
Right.
the cap.
And
Yeah.
and to extend him would be $40 million is where I'm putting it. I think it's in that ballpark because Russell Wilson got 35. Kirk's going to want to be the highest paid player ever at the moment he signs the deal.
Well, all quarterbacks end up being that, right? Like,
yeah, usually.
What do you think the extension is? Because right now he had a 3-year deal, it's all fully guaranteed. I think he's going to want all fully guaranteed again.
Oh,
he
sure,
set the precedent for himself.
Yep, exactly. Well, let me ask you this before we set the exact sort of number and then decide based on that, because we know it's going to be really expensive. I'm going to give you some quarterbacks, and you tell me whether you would give them $40 million. Let's just decide it's $40 million. Because
over what?
Let's say 3 more years.
Okay.
Would you do it for Matt Ryan? It's a tough one. It's a tough one.
It's a hard one.
I think Matt Ryan is actually a lot like Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, he is. And he signed his deal right after Kirk.
And in this very offense, the Shanahan-style offense, he had 117 quarterback rating in 2016, but then the offensive coordinator left and that dropped to 91. Does that sound to you like what's going to happen here? Probably. Right? I mean, doesn't that happen usually?
I mean, I think
Stefanski's going to be somewhere else next year.
Yeah, and Clint Kubiak could potentially become the next offensive coordinator, and Gary stays on.
Because you're trying to project quite a ways down the road here.
And I think that they would make a point to keep Kirk within this system because they know changing him, it's like the person with divorced parents sending the kid back and forth to each house, and it's like there's no stability.
Yes.
Like, I think that they look at that situation and think, hey, we found something that worked. We need to keep it in place because Kevin Stefanski's going to end up getting offers. I mean, look at the Dallas game itself is enough to get a few phone calls. So, I mean, yeah, I would for Matt Ryan, sure. I will go ahead and say that, I would give him that extension because, I mean, he is still part of that group of, I'd put him as a top 15 quarterback. So,
I would.
Okay.
I also think that Matt Ryan is kind of a little bit richer man's version than Kirk Cousins. I think he's
mobility-wise, no.
No, he's not, but I think he's a better NFL quarterback. Like, he's been to a Super Bowl. He's had 13-3 seasons. He led the NFL in quarterback rating. He's been a long time. He's got much better PFF scores historically than Cousins, but he's still sort of in that same ballpark of when he's got the right system, he really needs that to succeed. How about Jimmy Garoppolo? Would you give him $40 a year?
No.
How about Jared Goff?
No.
How about Derek Carr?
No.
These are the guys who profile similarly to Kirk Cousins.
I give Dak that though. If we're throwing
I think
it out
Dak
there.
is better. I think Dak is more dynamic, is the way I would put it.
I just say it because he's coming up for
and I would pay Dak after what we've seen.
Yeah.
But Derek Carr in his best years puts up similar numbers and similar PFF grades to Kirk Cousins.
Derek Carr is a worse quarterback than Kirk Cousins. I've watched both. And I watched Derek Carr in his best season as a pro, and I still think that Kirk has many steps ahead of him.
So
in a lot of
I tend to agree that he's better, but I think on paper he's very similar. And I think it's circumstance that causes him to be either really good or kind of meh. I mean, this year he's 10th by PFF as 105 quarterback rating with a team that doesn't have anywhere near the weapons that the Vikings do.
And they have the second easiest second half schedule of any team in the NFL.
So how about Jared Goff?
No, I said no.
But Jared Goff. Now take a look though at Jared Goff's statistics over the last 2 years, and here's the point that I'm getting to. That would be your nightmare scenario is that your perfect marriage of Cousins, Stefanski, and Kubiak, and Diggs and Thielen, and Irv Smith, and everything they've got, Delvin Cook. That it is just all coming together the way that Atlanta did in 2016 or the Los Angeles Rams did last year. Jared Goff last year, 101 quarterback rating, 13-3. The year before that, 11-4. And he gets to the Super Bowl, which everybody would take. But I think we knew in those 2 years, if anything slides off a little bit with Jared Goff, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. That would be the concern with Kirk Cousins. It's not, can he be really good over the next 2 years, which I think he can. It's, can he be good in 2021 through 2024?
When you don't know who the coaching staff is, you don't know what the other weapons are. Sure. I think in Goff's case, I don't even know how to say this. He's more of a system quarterback than Kirk Cousins. I really do believe that.
I think they're about the same in that way. I think that Cousins is a smarter individual.
I mean, but I get your point because look at how many injuries that offensive line has in Los Angeles, and look at what that's done to Jared Goff. Look at what Todd Gurley's regression with his knee has done to Jared Goff, and is completely thrown out their playbook.
And he still averages more yards per attempt than Cousins did last year.
That's okay. That's fair. I think back to the first half, and I'm wondering why he was averaging 4.8 yards per attempt. Well, that's play calling. That's not necessarily all